All right, let's dive into this one today. Um, The Courage to be Disliked. It's a book that's been, well, it's been making a splash,
Hmm.
and you've all been asking for us to take a closer look at it. So here we are, and we've got some great resources to help us do that. We've got a review by Anuradha Sridharan and even a deep dive by Matt Tillotson.
Yeah, it's definitely a title that catches your eye, right? Like who wants to be disliked? And it's based on the work of Alfred Adler, a psychologist who, well, he wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, so The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. It's not your typical self-help book, is it? I mean, it's written as a dialogue between a philosopher and a young man,
Mm,
which, as Enrada points out, makes it surprisingly engaging, right? It's like you're sitting there with them listening to this debate unfold.
exactly. And it really pulls you into those bold ideas, those ideas that stem from Adlerian psychology, which, well, it's a whole different way of looking at things compared to, say, Freud.
Oh, okay, so how so?
Well, Adler, he wasn't so focused on digging into your past to figure out your present problems. He was more interested in what he called teleology, which is basically the idea that your goals, your aspirations are what really drive you.
So it's not about tell me about your childhood. It's more about like, where do you want to go?
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your life, right? You're not just a product of your past. It's like that story from the book about the well water, how it feels warm in the winter and cool in the summer.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
The water itself hasn't changed, only our perception of it, right? And that's how Adler saw our experiences. It's not the experience itself, but the meaning we give it that shapes us.
Yeah, that's a powerful way to look at it.
Yeah.
And Anretta pulled out this quote that really, well, it really resonated with me. We are not determined by our experiences, but the meaning we give them is self-determining. It's kind of scary, right?
It is, because it puts the responsibility squarely on us, right? But it's also incredibly empowering. We have the power to choose how we interpret our experiences and how they shape us.
And that leads to one of the core principles of Adlerian psychology, the idea that all problems are essentially interpersonal relationship problems.
Now, that's a bold statement, isn't it?
It is. So like even if I, completely mess up a job interview, that's somehow a relationship problem.
Well, think about it. Maybe you were so worried about what your parents would think, or maybe you were trying to impress a former mentor that you lost sight of your own strengths, right? Or maybe a past conflict with a colleague left you feeling less confident. It's all connected, isn't it? Our relationships and the meaning we attach to them, they influence everything we do, even in situations that seem totally unrelated.
Okay, I'm starting to see how those dots connect. And it seems like this ties into what Matt Tillotson was talking about, that Adlerian psychology is all about finding a sense of belonging, right? Being part of a community. But how do we balance that with the book's pretty radical idea that freedom is being disliked by other people? Like, how can we belong if we're okay with being disliked?
That's the paradox, isn't it? And it's the part of the book that people wrestle with the most. But it's not about, pushing people away or being a jerk. It's about letting go of the need for constant approval, recognizing that not everyone is going to like us, and that's okay.
So it's about being true to ourselves, even if it means, ruffling some feathers.
Yeah.
Like, in a way, that could lead to stronger connections because you're not trying to be someone you're not.
Precisely. And this is where Adler introduces the idea of horizontal and vertical relationships.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about those.
So vertical relationships, they're all about hierarchy, right? Power dynamics. One person is above, the other is below. Think about the traditional student-teacher relationship or even some parent-child relationships.
And horizontal relationships are more like.
They're based on equality and mutual respect. You see the other person as a partner, not as someone to be, put on a pedestal or looked down upon. And even the way we praise others, as Anuradha points out, can sometimes reinforce those vertical dynamics.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it like that. But you're right. We often praise in a way that's kind of judgmental. Like, you did good. You met my standards.
Exactly. It's all about being mindful of the message we're sending in our interactions. Are we reinforcing hierarchy, or are we fostering a sense of equality?
So this courage to be disliked thing, it's really about letting go of that need for validation, right?
Yeah.
And focusing on building those horizontal relationships where we can just, be ourselves.
Yeah.
Even if it means not everyone's going to be on board with that.
That's a great way to sum it up. It's about embracing the freedom to live life that's true to you, even if it means not getting everyone's approval along the way.
That's a powerful message.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that, well, it's one that a lot of us need to hear. Okay, so we talked about these big ideas, but how do we actually put them into practice? I mean, the courage to be disliked, horizontal relationships, all that stuff. It sounds great in theory, but what does it look like in real life?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we take these kind of heady concepts and make them, well, make them actionable?
Exactly. Like, I'm all for separating tasks, but what does that actually mean when, say, I have a friend who's like constantly calling to vent about their job? I want to be there for them, but it's draining.
That's a perfect example. See, the book says that each person in a relationship, they have their own tasks, their own responsibilities. Your friend's task is to manage their work stress. It's not your job to fix it for them.
So I shouldn't offer advice or try to, like, cheer them up.
It's not about, shutting them down or being uncaring. You can listen, you can validate their feelings, but you also have a responsibility to yourself, to your own well-being. And that might mean setting some boundaries, like saying, hey, I can only talk for 15 minutes right now, or suggesting they talk to their manager or maybe a therapist if it's really getting to them.
Okay, I see. So it's about recognizing that I'm not responsible for their happiness,
Yeah.
and they're not responsible for mine. We each have our own stuff to deal with.
Right. And this applies to, well, to all kinds of relationships, not just friendships. Think about a romantic relationship where, one partner is always trying to control the other's spending, or a parent who's like trying to dictate their adult child's career path. Those are all examples of, well, of tasks getting tangled up and boundaries getting crossed.
So separating tasks is really about respecting each other's autonomy, right? Not getting caught in that codependency trap. Having the courage to say, this is my lane and I'm going to handle it my way, even if it means, disappointing someone.
You got it. It's not selfish to take care of yourself, to make choices that align with your own goals. In fact, by doing that, you're actually creating healthier relationships because you're not relying on others to fill some void in you.
This is making a lot of sense. But I have to ask, how do we deal with the uncomfortable feelings, right? Like, when we do face disapproval or rejection, it's hard not to take it personally.
Oh, absolutely. We're social creatures. We crave connection. So it's natural to feel hurt when someone doesn't approve of us. But here's where that courage to be disliked comes in. The book suggests we reframe how we see those judgments.
So instead of seeing them as a personal attack, we
See them as information feedback, maybe, but not necessarily a reflection of our inherent worth.
Yeah.
Remember, other people's opinions, they often say more about them, about their own insecurities and expectations than they do about you.
That's a good point. It's like their judgment is their problem, not mine.
Right. And the more we practice this, the easier it gets. The more we prioritize our own values, the less we'll seek validation from others. And the less we seek validation, the less power those judgments will have over us.
It's like we have to rewire our brains, right? To stop seeking approval and start trusting ourselves.
It is a process. It takes time. But the rewards are, well, they're huge. When you start living authentically, when you free yourself from that pressure to please everyone else, you unlock this incredible sense of freedom.
And it all comes back to living in the present moment, doesn't it? Letting go of that worry about what others think and just focusing on what we can control, which is our own choices, our own actions right here, right now.
Absolutely. Each moment is a fresh start, a chance to create the life we want, whether or not we have everyone's stamp of approval.
Speaking of approval, earlier we talked about how even praise can be a form of control, right? I'd love to dig into that a little deeper, especially when it comes to like interacting with my kids.
Sure, that's an important one. The book argues that when we praise someone, especially someone who's, looking to us for guidance, like a child, it often comes with this unspoken message, I approve of you because you're meeting my expectations.
So it's like we're rewarding them for conforming rather than encouraging them to, like, develop their own internal compass.
Exactly. And this isn't to say that all praise is bad, of course, but it's about being aware of the context and the message we're sending. The book suggests that true encouragement comes from recognizing effort and progress, not just outcomes.
So instead of saying, you got an A, you're so smart,
Yeah.
I might say, I'm really impressed with how hard you studied for that test. Your dedication really paid off.
Exactly. It's about helping them develop that intrinsic motivation, that love of learning, rather than just chasing external validation.
And that ties back to those horizontal relationships, right?
Yeah.
Treating kids as equals with respect and autonomy, not just imposing our own, expectations and judgments on them.
Absolutely. It's about creating a space where they feel safe to explore, to make mistakes, to be themselves without that fear of judgment or disapproval.
Wow, this is giving me a lot to think about. It's like we're recalibrating our entire social compass. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, what are you all thinking out there? How are these ideas resonating with you? Have you ever felt that pressure to please everyone, even if it meant, well, even if it meant sacrificing your own happiness? This book really throws out some wild ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I was reading Eliza Stopp's review, and she was blown away by the idea that, well, the idea that we aren't controlled by our past traumas. She said it was tough to accept at first.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one to swallow. And it's important to remember that while the book isn't saying that traumatic experiences don't have a big impact, they absolutely do. But it's more about recognizing that, well, that we have a choice in how we let those experiences shape us, shape our present and future.
Right. So it's not about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's more about like taking back control, right? Choosing how we respond to it. Instead of asking, why me?
Yeah.
We can ask, what now?
Exactly. It's about moving from feeling like a victim to, well, to becoming the author of our own story. And that brings us back to that idea of living in the present moment.
Oh, yeah, that idea of life as a series of dots, not a continuous line. That really resonated with me. It's like a reminder to savor each moment instead of getting stuck in the past or worrying about the future.
Right. It's about recognizing that each dot, each present moment, is a chance to choose, to act, to create the life we want. And when we dwell on regrets or anxieties, well, we miss out on the richness of right now.
Okay, I get that, living in the moment.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's easier said than done, right? Our minds are kind of programmed to replay past mistakes and freak out about what might happen next.
Yeah.
So how do we actually train ourselves to be more present?
Well, it takes practice, like anything else. Mindfulness meditation is a great tool, but you can also bring mindfulness into everyday things, Pay attention to your senses, the way your body feels, the sights and sounds around you, the taste of your food. Really be present in whatever you're doing.
So it's not about like clearing our minds completely, but more about noticing those thoughts without letting them, take over.
Exactly. And when you find yourself drifting into worries or regrets, gently bring your attention back to the present moment. It's like training a puppy. You got to keep redirecting it back to what you want it to focus on.
That's a great analogy. And it reminds me of something Sarah from Smart Bitches Trashy Books said in her review. She said this book really stuck with her. Even though some of the ideas were hard for her to wrap her head around, it seems like this book really gets under your skin and makes you think.
I think that's the mark of a truly thought-provoking book, isn't it? It challenges our assumptions, makes us question things, and ultimately it pushes us to grow.
Right. It makes you ask those big questions. Like, are we really going about this happiness thing the right way? Are we too focused on what other people think? Are we letting our past hold us back?
And in the end, the book gives us a choice, right? We can choose to live a life driven by fear, by the need for approval, by all those limiting beliefs, or we can choose a life of courage, authenticity, and freedom. It's not always easy, but it's a choice we all have the power to make.
I love that reminder that we have that power, that we're not just, puppets of our circumstances or our past.
And that freedom, that power to choose, well, that's what makes life so exciting, so full of possibilities.
Yeah, so well said. And on that note, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. We've talked a lot about the courage to be disliked, but could embracing this courage actually help us build more genuine connections? Could it free us from that pressure to perform and allow us to connect with others on a deeper level? It's something to think about as you explore the courage to be disliked and its message. So until next time, happy diving.